Hello, respected viewers. I'm George from Ireland. So this video is about what's going on in Belarus. You might know that a few days ago, the 9th of August, a presidential election was held in Belarus, and the president, Alexander Lukashenka, he announced that he had won his sixth presidential election on the trot, and the electoral commission announced the improbable result of him having scored over 80% of the votes. There were times when he was satisfied with 60%, but no longer. The remaining 20% divided up between a number of candidates, one of whom got 10%. The runner-up was Svetlana, I hope I pronounced this correctly, Tsikhanskaya. So anyway, most people have said that these are hugely fraudulent and refuse to accept them. Lukashenko was hinting that he was going to rig the elections in advance. But just to give himself a bit of a chance, he made sure that his serious rivals were banned. Those who were reasonably well known, seemed quite credible, former ambassador in the United States, a senior banker, and they were charged with various crimes. Some people say trumped up. I don't know they were trumped up, but I find that very credible because those who seriously oppose him have a nasty habit of being accused of all sorts of unlikely offences. And a few months ago, someone came forward who said he's part of a special police unit in the mid-90s who abducted and killed one of Lukashenko's rivals. So Lukashenko was born in Belarus. He likes to claim to be that his father was killed in the Second World War. Well, if so, Lukashenko is even more miraculous than he realized, because his mother was pregnant not for 9 months, but for 9 years, since Lukashenko was born in 1954. He actually didn't grow up with his father. His parents weren't married. We must have some idea who his father is. I mean, I'm not sure if Lukashenko is his mother's maiden name, but in Russophone countries, you take a patronymic. Your middle name is the father's name, and then you're obviously Ovich or Evna, depending on your male or female. But anyway, he got a hard time for that. But maybe that's why he's so tough and keen to throw his weight around. He was bullied as a child, maybe traumatized, but he's a real savage bully himself. A bit like W.H. Auden's poem, "Those to whom evil is done, do evil in return." So he's a large and physically imposing man, a choleric character, with his booming voice, notable for his intolerance. So Lukashenko was manager of a state farm in the Soviet era, and seemed to think that communism was the best thing since sliced bread, and has never really reconciled himself to the fall of the Soviet Union. So the Belarusians used to be more Russian than the Russians, in fact. Now, they speak another Slavonic language, which is closely related to Russian. They can all speak Russian as well. Some of them only speak Russian, actually can't speak Belarusian. And some Belarusians be ethnically Russian, ethnically Ukrainian, a few other things. And the Belarusians did not have a strong identity until the early 20th century. As people often say, they wouldn't have realized that they were Belarusian until some people told them, and that was spoken more in the countryside than in the cities. And Lukashenko's surname is indicative of Ukrainian ancestry, because that Enka ending is typically a Ukrainian. I'm not saying he is Ukrainian, but he's obviously got to have a Ukrainian ancestor somewhere there. Could be several generations ago. Might be just a small fraction Ukrainian. So he thought he found the magic formula for elections, which is forbid your serious rivals from standing, have total control of the media. So state media pumps out pro-Lukashenko propaganda and blazon forth his supposed successes, demonize his opponents, promise jam tomorrow, Soviet nostalgia, securocracy, paternalism, upholding gender roles, appealing to homophobia, militarism, and so on. And that worked well for a while. And of course, just fiddle the votes. I mean, do you bother to count them? Just pick a number, announce whatever result that you want. Now, I don't know for certain that the polls were rigged, but I don't believe there are any independent observers. Even Russian election observers weren't allowed in because they wouldn't be pro-Lukashenko enough. Now, in 1999, Russia and Belarus agreed to reunite, but over 20 years on, it still hasn't happened, and it's founded on Lukashenko's wish not to play second fiddle. He was a relatively new president then. It was difficult in the 90s setting up an independent country, having their own Belarusian ruble, not the same as the Russian ruble, and on and on and on. All of a sudden, their trade partners, other Soviet republics, were foreign countries using different currencies. So maybe seemed a better idea to reunite with Russia. But he and Putin have a bit of a personality clash, even though they're actually rather similar. They're much cut from the same cloth, very much into being the thought police, in being violently intolerant of dissent, being hyper nationalists and so forth, and into physical fitness. Though Putin's obviously got small man syndrome, Lukashenka, being quite a fine figure of man, does not. So repression and rigging usually works for him when he's holding an election, claiming there's no alternative, saying that the opposition is all a NATO plot. Having some sort of feeble dummy candidate didn't work this time. But Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya, 37-year-old housewife, she captured the public imagination. People were saying that that Lukashenko was a cockroach. Demonstrations are usually banned. The police will severely beat them up. There's over a 99% conviction rate. Torture is not uncommon in their prisons. Belarus still has the death penalty. Admittedly, it doesn't execute very many people, just several a year. But you really don't want to be caught saying the wrong thing. So Belarus was supplied with cut price oil and gas from Russia, and indeed Russian pipelines passed through Belarus onto Poland and other EU countries. And they were always squabbling about the transit fees that Russia had to pay to Belarus and so on. And Russia was fed up to the back teeth of subsidizing Belarus and not getting enough in return. Okay, there are a couple of military bases there. But why won't you actually reunite? And they didn't want to reunite. And then last year, someone actually openly said that he wanted Belarus to rejoin Russia, and Lukashenko had the guy sent to prison. And conditions in a Belarusian prison are not luxurious. Anyway, so you wouldn't be doing a PhD in human rights in a Belarusian prison. So the demonstrations have broken out, been banned, illegal demonstrations. The police, it seems, have been ordered to use gratuitous violence, and indeed have, even just like smashing wing mirrors off cars, just having to be parked in the area, or even any passers-by, even those who are actually not taking part in the demonstration, just on the off chance that you might be sympathetic. It's not worth it, stay well away. But the numbers have grown and grown. And the opposition was claiming that 220,000 people demonstrated in Minsk, a very impressive figure in a city of 2 million people. And there was a pro-Lukashenko rally that attracted several thousand. They are said to be often bussed in from other towns. He's more unpopular in Minsk and the other big cities, and more supported the countryside, apparently. More traditional-minded people, deferential people. People are not so exposed to foreign ideas, haven't got enough money to travel abroad and so on, and see that freedom is better. They were always having spats with Russia. So what to do? He always said that he was going to improve living standards, and that never ever materialized in over 20 years of saying it. So what's going to happen now? The demonstrations are maybe unmanageable. People say it's redolent of Eastern Europe in the autumn of change, 1989. Or we've seen this in the former Soviet space before. Let's say Kyrgyzstan about 2010, bring the first woman to office as president in Central Asia. Or Georgia in 2004, or even Armenia in 2018, or Ukraine in 2004, when Putin's poodle Yanukovych was forced out when he tried to rig the elections, or 2004 when he's forced out again, despite his police shooting dead about 100 people on the Maidan, that's the major square in Kiev. So Putin has a horror of this. He was a KGB officer in East Germany in the 1980s, and he thought that communism was rock solid there. It was extremely oppressive. The Stasi was everywhere, total surveillance state. Yet even that fell dramatically. And he was horrified by just how quickly this happened. The situation can deteriorate very fast for a dictatorship. So Lukashenko's been hinting that his troops would open fire. Got a Belarusian friend here said, no, they wouldn't do that. I don't know. But the police and armed forces have got to be reasonably well paid, thought he's ensured their loyalty. So demonstrations not allowed, but they're going ahead anyway, and it might reach critical mass. Now, some of the police said they're disgusted with their work. They're not going to do it. They're not going to arrest people. The ambassador to Slovakia has defected to the side of the opposition. And Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya, she left the country for Lithuania. So Belarus's neighbors, Lithuania, Latvia, Poland, they've all had oppression like Lukashenko's. and he's a former communist, and they've all found freedom, and they're urging him to step down to have real elections, but he's not doing it. So the economy's gone badly. He said that coronavirus was a mass psychosis, who refused to do anything about it, and of course it ripped through the population, killed people. They've admitted to a few thousand deaths, but presumably the real death toll must be much higher than that. And in his rally the other day, he said, "On my knees, I beg you to support me." Wow, he didn't actually kneel down, but he's getting desperate because he was always a hard man. He was always ruling with a rod of iron. If he suddenly has to offer concessions, that suggests he's feeble, suggesting he will be willing to share power, but not whilst under duress from mass demonstrations. Well, demonstrations aren't duress. People have a right to demonstrate, to express themselves, to choose the government on which they live. It says so in the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights, to which Belarus is a signatory. Anyway, so the police are arresting people. Over 7,000 people have been arrested, and the prisons will be at bursting points. At state factories, people have gone on strike and so on. Some people in state media who are constantly had to propagandize for Lukashenko are refusing to do it. But so far, it's just a trickle of defections. If that turns into a flood, then he's done for. So far, it's not happening. He's let the public know. He's spoken to Vladimir Putin twice over the weekend, and Putin's offered unstinting support for Lukashenko, recognized him as the rightful president. Of course, Putin would always take the side of a tyrant against those who want freedom. So that Russia is willing to step in, send police officers, send troops. If Belarus's prisons are full, you can send them to our prisons. But Russia's going to want something back from it, because Lukashenko has been rude to Putin recently. He's not played ball. He's not fully reunited. There was a thought of a union state. There'd be a president for Belarus, a president for Russia, a president for the Union together, and that might have been a retirement job for Putin. But so far, it's not happening. Belarusian citizens do have some privileges in Russia. They've the right to go there without a visa, stay as long as they want, and work there, and Russians can go the other direction. But that's it. So there's going to have to be rapprochement. But Putin wants something, more military bases. You're going to pay the full price for energy, or actually reunite with us. And we don't know what's been agreed behind the scenes, maybe nothing. But even if Putin doesn't get any concessions, he doesn't want to see a free country beside Russia. Might well be a pro-Western country, and also be a dangerous example to Russians to what can happen about people power, that you can have in future fair elections, an independent judiciary, freedom of information, freedom of association, the right to demonstrate, and a crackdown on corruption, and no more presidents plundering the treasury to build palaces for themselves, as Putin does. And we don't need militarism, and we don't need to be an ally of some of the cruelest regimes in the world. Russian people might get ideas, and some of them already want these liberties I've been talking about. So even if Lukashenko doesn't give Putin anything in return, Putin, much though he dislikes Lukashenko, he's not the worst. He's better than the country being a free country, or better than being a NATO country. At the moment, no one's talking about actually joining NATO. So remember, some of the neighbours are in NATO. Okay, Lithuania's in NATO, Latvia's in NATO, and Poland is in NATO. And there was talk of Ukraine joining it, and that's a Russian nightmare. They don't want another NATO country on their doorstep. So on the other hand, the Western countries, they would like to see Lukashenko gone. They would like to see a free country, it not to be a Russian ally. But this might be pushing Belarus towards Russia, because that's the only option they got left. Yes, Belarus has got a good relationship with China. China's invested a few things, but Belarus is not really worth very much. The Chinese are very canny. It's got no natural resources. Country of 9 million people, got really nothing to offer. Why should they stick their neck out? Why should they put some money in there? So yeah, they've praised Lukashenko, but they're not going to bail him out. They're not going to send troops or send money. Anyway, I think he'll hang on, because if push comes to shove, he would order his troops to open fire, and police officers open fire. Most of them would do, and if not, Putin would send in the soldiers and police officers, and Western countries just wouldn't react quickly enough. UN resolution, debate the situation, fact-finding. Putin would deny. If there's a massacre, if he shoots dead 1,000 unarmed people, he said, no, they were armed, or no, terrorists did it, the opposition did it, or something like that. And we would be left guessing. There'd be a lot of palesni duraki saying, oh, well, maybe Putin's right. And we'd take a while to work out what's happening, by which time the little green men would have created facts on the ground. Putin might send in troops even without insignia, as when he invaded Crimea in 2014. it's possible that Putin will calculate that Lukashenko is past saving. So far, it doesn't look like it. So the situation hasn't got that serious. Only two people have been killed. So for Lukashenko, a relatively good outcome would be the demonstrations get a bit smaller tomorrow, and a bit smaller the day after, and smaller the day after that, and eventually peter out, and he can arrest just a few ringleaders. It could keep on going, but we're going to get to tipping point in a few days that either it's going to succeed or it's going to be gradually getting smaller. There might be a massacre in between. So there's thinking that he will use maximum force. And yes, there'll be international condemnation. The European Union is already considering sanctions, but he'd rather do that. He'd rather suffer sanctions than be forced from power. He's very obstinate. He's not going to make significant concessions to the opposition. There might be negotiations. There might be pretending that he's thinking about offering something to the other side, but that's not the case. So Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya, she called on people not to demonstrate before she left the country for Lithuania. It seems that she was only allowed out, having said that. And some of his opponents have left the country, taking their children with them for fear. They've often been told your children can be taken away from you. If you are a dissident, you will get death threats, phone calls in the middle of the night, threatening you and your children. So a lot of people just don't dare. It's ruled by fear. Anyway, we shall see. As I say, I think so far the security forces are on his side. If it comes to mass-scale violence, they might well use that. And Russia will back him up because Putin really doesn't want, as I say, this to be a free country or a pro-NATO country. And NATO's not going to invade, despite Lukashenko saying, oh, it's all a NATO plot and they're massing troops on their borders. That's a lie. They're not going to. But, he is the president of Belarus, because they're illegitimate president, but effectively he is the president. And I don't know for sure the results were rigged. I just think it's very, very high chance. So if he invites Russia to provide military assistance, then that is legal. And it looks like that's what he would do. And other countries are not going to intervene militarily about a private internal matter, because that also could lead to a third world war against Russia. So sadly, I think Lukashenko is there to stay, maybe chastened, maybe chastised by NATO sanctions. But I think it's unlikely he'll be overthrown. So will he still be in power at the end of this year? I give it quite a high chance, like 70%. Anyway, we shall see. I very much need donations to keep this channel going, so please donate on PayPal, georgecallahan79@gmail.com. Callahan, Callahan. Thank you very much. Good night.